behalf of the Commemorative Air Force Red Tail Squadron, I want to thank all of you for joining us again for this continuing series with original Tuskegee Airmen. This particular program was recorded live on February 12th, 2012, and I'm your moderator, Stan Ross. Joining us today will be Colonel Harold Brown from the Tuskegee Airmen. Unfortunately, one of our other special guests is unable to join us today, and I hope you will all appreciate and understand that it does become a little more challenging for these gentlemen as time marches on. But Colonel Brown, welcome, and thank you for joining us again.
All right, sir.
As I mentioned to you at the close of our last program, a couple of questions have remained unanswered, and we want to get to those as quickly as we can and also make a sincere effort to get to all of the questions that were submitted. Let's start with a couple of questions from Julie Cohen and Barry Cohen. First of all, Colonel Brown, could you please enlighten us a little bit about your reflections on President Truman's executive order integrating the armed forces? What was that like when that initially happened, and how do you view the impact of that order as time has continued from its initiation?
Well, we knew something was in the works, and we have heard, a lot of things that were going on, and and we knew Truman very well. Matter of fact, he was really championing our cause way back in 1939, when we first started arguing about this thing, and Senator Truman and Senator, what was his name, from Illinois, I'll think of it in a minute. They were very, very supportive of us, even way back then. So I knew that this was something that was very, very close to Truman. However, when they did announce it, it was interesting because I think the general feeling was somewhat mixed. We had all been flying together. We knew each other by name. We got along great together. We had a great organization. Everything was just fine. But then the thought of breaking us all up, sending all of us out in 4 different directions all around the world, was just a little sobering. And I know I had somewhat mixed emotions about it, even though I knew that, hey, that was what needed to be done when it comes time to do it. I certainly had, mixed emotions. I had very, very dear friends, and I just hated the thought, oh boy, where am I going, and, what outfit will I wind up in, and will I be there by myself, and all those kinds of things. So I would say it was somewhat of a mixed bag. On one level, it was extremely well accepted. Yes, this is the next step in the entire evolution of starting from where we started to becoming totally integrated into the military. But on another personal level, there was some intrepidation, and we were a little saddened by it that my dear old buddies, no longer will they be my dear old buddies. They'll go in one direction, I'll go in another direction. And I think that was the general feeling across the base.
Very interesting. I would have thought it would have been welcomed with open arms and absolute, a complete embrace, so it's very interesting to hear those reflections. Another question coming from Nick Strapoli asks, the Red Tails, did they originally fly the C model Mustang? And he was curious because the D model is what was presented in the film, and wonder if you could...
well, that is true, but they first gave us all of the hand-me-down P-47s, and that was in June of 1944. They had a change of equipment from P-39 to the P-47s. And those were raggedy. They came from many of the other 4 fighter groups who are now picking up the new P-51D models. But we only had those 47s for something like 30, 32, 33 days. And then they started giving us the C models because they were bringing in the brand new D models, which were going to the other outfits, and we got the hand-me-downs, which were the old raggedy P-51Cs. And so that's how we wound up. And initially, that's all we had was just the C models. And we didn't start picking up the D models until, and we were only getting them, a handful at a time. But, we were slowly getting them. Matter of fact, when I went down in March, I have flown the D model on several occasions. But my regular airplane, A-32, was the P-51C model. And that was the airplane that I was flying on March the 4th when I was shot down. So that was well towards the end of the war. There was only a couple of months left. And when we still had some C models. But eventually, we did get rid of those last few C models and finally had all D models, but that didn't happen until the very last 6-7 weeks of the war that we were completely converted to D models.
Pretty amazing. As you well know, and most of the audience in attendance today knows, the Red Tail Squadron flies a restored C model, the P-51C Mustang, which I've had the pleasure of experiencing from the back seat. In case the audience would be interested, there is an opportunity to get an actual flight in the Red Tail P-51C Mustang. Rather than restoring it to absolute World War II accuracy, we removed the equipment from the radio compartment, which was right behind the pilot seat, and instead have installed a guest chair back there.
Yeah. Now then, in the regular P-51C, we had a fuselage tank back there that would carry just about 85 gallons of gas. But it's interesting that fuselage tank caused the airplane to be just a little unstable. So once you got airborne, which you took off from your main tanks, then rather switching to your wing tanks immediately, you would then use the fuel out of your fuselage tank and take it down to 15 gallons. And that would cause that unstabilizing force to vanish. But that was the first thing that you would do, is switch to the fuselage tank while you were climbing out and going up to pick up your bombers. And that was back there taking up a lot of the room that back seat was taking up behind the pilot.
Very interesting. I had seen in the restoration that there was a fuel tank, a place to put fuel in the fuselage, and this is the first I've heard about the details of that. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's see, we've got a lot of other questions coming in, and we are grateful for all of those. Some of them are duplicates, again, from our original questioners, the Cohens, and Bill Zook from Winnipeg also asking a similar question about the opportunities for the pilots in the airlines after the war, and what numbers, approximately how many of the original Tuskegee Airmen stayed in the military after World War II?
Well, there weren't a heck of a lot. Number-wise, it would be a little difficult for me to come up with a precise number. But at the time that we were integrated, we had gone from the 477th Composite Group, which had B-25s and the P-47Ns. We went back to the old 332nd Fighter Group, and we got rid of the B-25s, and we had 3 squadrons of P-47s. Now, if I had to venture a guess, I would say that close to half of the pilots and half of using the ground crewmen all left the Air Force. just about the time that we were about ready to be integrated. And I would say by 1950, those 50% were gone. And what was left was just about the other half of us. And then keep in mind that there really weren't that many, because after the war, there were many guys that got out from the time that they came back from overseas up until the time that we were integrated. Guys were leaving the Air Force left and right. So when integration came, granted, we had the group there, but we didn't have an overabundance of pilots at that time. And I would say at least half of them left. But if I had to venture a guess, it would be strictly a guess. And so I'll just leave it at that, because number-wise, I just don't know.
Very, very interesting. Here's a question from a 9-year-old. Nikki, I believe it's Nikki Tenuto, is asking about how many Tuskegee Airmen were there during World War II.
Well, we started training. The training program started in July 1941, and it went for 5 years up until June of 1946. I was instructing in Tuskegee at that time, and so was Captain Colonel McGee. He was Captain McGee at that time. So during those 5 years, we trained not quite 1,000. The figure that kick around is 995 pilots were trained. Out of the 995 total pilots trained during the 5-year period, 450 approximately, and that's the number that is normally accepted, but I even hear that that is a rather shaky number. But nevertheless, 450 of those pilots went overseas to fight the war in Europe, and the remaining pilots stayed here and became, bomber pilots. And there were also some single engine pilots too. But the rest of the pilots did not get overseas. So to answer his question, the 450 out of the 995 that were trained went overseas, but they trained just about 995 total pilots over that 5-year period from July of 1941 up until June of 1946.
Amazing ability to recall the dates and the numbers. I'm very impressed. I can't remember what I had for breakfast, so this is really an impressive exhibit.
Hey, don't feel bad. When I go into the next room, I forget why I even went into that room. And then I got to come back in and make myself a list.
You mentioned you were involved in the training program at Tuskegee, and I just want to ask a couple of questions about that, because I had the privilege of accompanying Don Hines in our P-51C to the ribbon-cutting ceremony at the National Park Service in Tuskegee, Alabama. Mm-hmm. And I have to know, what in the world was it like? We were there on a couple of days when it was about 100 degrees and 100% humidity, and I cannot imagine what it must have been like to train under those conditions.
Well, in the South you can get some very, very warm weather, but most of the training bases were in the South, because you had warm weather 365 days a year. But it could get very hot and very steamy down in Alabama. And it's interesting. I can remember in my class in May of '44 when we flew the P-40, and it was very, very hot. You would taxi out to the end of the runway. There was a great big water truck out at the end of the runway. The water truck would pump water out in front of that big nose, and where they had the big air scoop, and they would suck water through it to actually keep the engine nice and cool. And then when we were ready to go, we would then pull off, because if you sat there too long, boy, you could almost overheat in that P-40. But that's how they kept the thing cool until we were ready to go. Then we would pull out and go. But you're right, the weather was horrible.
Well, as in the training program, what kind of garments were you wearing? I would imagine that once you got to altitude, you needed the cold weather gear, and was that the kind of garment you were wearing on the ground?
No, as a matter of fact, all we wore was nothing but just the coveralls in the summertime, and that was it. But in the P-40, rarely down south did you ever get much above 10, 12,000 feet. That was it, and most of your flying was done from something 10,000 feet down while you were flying the P-40.
Well,
now, of course, that was in training.
It was pretty impressive, the heat and humidity at that training base.
Yeah.
I can't imagine being put under the kind of pressure that your teams were put under. And again, reflecting the comments of many of our questioners, hats off and thank you for your service. It's an amazing tribute to the persistence and the dedication that the Tuskegee Airmen exhibited. One of the questions that we talked about last time we want to discuss a little bit here is an event that the military eventually has named the Top Gun competition. And I believe the original 1949 gunnery meet was actually won by a couple of the Tuskegee Airmen pilots. And it really paints a very unsavory picture of the continuing prejudice that was faced by the black service members. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about who was involved, what your awareness was at the time, and tell us a little bit about your understanding of that piece of history.
Well, as you know, they did have a gunnery meet, and it wasn't the first one. They did have several out there. But in 1949, they did have the gunnery meet. Now, they had two divisions. They had jets, and they had conventional aircraft. At that time, we were flying the P-47N model, and we were the only active duty Air Force group that was flying the 47N model. The rest of the guys, the groups in conventional aircraft were flying P-51s. So we had several P-51 groups, and we had ours with the P-47 group. And in addition to that, there was one other aircraft. There was the F-82. Do you remember the F-82 that looked like two twin P-51s?
Correct. Yes, there's one being restored right here.
They had one group of those out there that was also participating, but we were not up against the jets. They had a number. The F-80 was being rolled into the inventory, and we had a number of groups that had the F-80 jet fighters in '49. So they flew their tournament. Conventional aircraft flew our tournament. The tournament went on, I think, for 4 days, and they had several phases of it. They had aerial gunnery, where we had an airplane dragging a sleeve with which you fired upon. You also had dive bombing as another scored event. You had skip bombing, which was a scored event, and then you had plain old rocket fire and machine gun, because we also carry 5-inch rockets on that P-47, and we had machine guns, and that was all done under general strafing. So those were all of the events, and all of the events that you were graded upon. And then your total grade, as you participated in each of those events, you were scored. And of course, the team coming out with the highest score came out the winner. And we came out with the highest score in the conventional aircraft. Very impressive. Now, there were, like I said, 3 pilots. There was Captain Alvin Temple, who was captain of the team that was participating. Temple went over early in the war and with the P-40, the 99th, and then he was transferred up to the 332nd Group when the 99th was transferred up back in July of 1944. So Alvin Temple was one of the pilots. Another pilot was Harry T. Stewart. Stewart came out in class 44F, was in the class right behind mine. And his big claim to fame was that he joined that very special group of people, these victories in one day. Matter of fact, the two greatest days we had in the war was March 31st and April the 1st. And on those 2 days, we shot down 25 enemy aircraft. On the second day, Harry Stewart got 3 victories. And there were a total of 4 people who had gotten 3 victories, in one air battle. Well, that was Harry Stewart, the other pilot. And then we had another pilot who didn't get overseas, Lieutenant Jim Harvey. Harvey was an excellent pilot, but he graduated in a class right before they stopped sending any more additional people overseas, so he never got overseas. So Jim Harvey stayed in, was part of the 477th Composite Group, and then he was in the 99th when we switched over to the 332nd again. So most of the pilots, incidentally, came out of the 99th Fighter Squadron, and they were the ones that made up the team. We also had another pilot, a kid by the name of Alexander, who was sent over with the team as a spare, but Alec never actually flew. The 3 primary pilots flew, and they were the ones who scored, all the points, and you'd have 3-man teams. So that was it.
Now, Cliff Harding has sent in an interesting question. Cliff's question is, all the programs that he has seen tell the story of the first German jets being shot down by white pilots, but stories told by his relatives indicate that it was the pilots from the 332nd. Can you please clarify?
Well, we were given credit for shooting down the first, but I don't think that was the case. There were earlier victories with that ME-262, and as I read the history, which was a chronology of all the missions that we flew on, clearly there's evidence that the first ME-262 was not shot down on the mission to Berlin, which was March the 24th of 1945, and Roscoe Brown was given credit, but I don't think that was the case. Even though they said it was the first, I don't believe that was the first. I am reasonably certain that there were earlier victories over the ME-262 by white pilots.
Very, very amazing insights from one of the gentlemen who lived this history and created this history, Colonel Harold Brown, native of Minneapolis, now living in Ohio. And we thank Mr. Harding for that question. And we're going to continue in just a moment. But I'd like to take just a bit of time here to direct people who are joining this webinar for the first time and may not have attended on previous ones to our website at redtail.org. We are dedicated to telling this story and preserving the history of the Tuskegee Airmen. Our primary objective is to carry the lessons and the legacy of these remarkable people, the Tuskegee Airmen, into every classroom in North America. And we have people on the webinar today from coast to coast and several from Canada. We want to pay special gratitude to all of our viewers today, and would like to ask you to take just a moment on your computers or by telephone to feel free to invite others who might be interested in this amazing history and this retelling of it by one of the original participants in this remarkable piece of American history to join us on this webinar and share this remarkable experience. And if you like what you're hearing today, if you appreciate the effort that the Red Tail Squadron goes to keep this history alive, You can simply use your cell phone and text Red Tail to the number 20222. It's the simplest way to make a small $10 donation. Red Tail to 20222 will help us keep this effort alive to get this story into many hearts and minds as we possibly can, because we believe it's an important part of history that needs telling. I'm going to continue with a couple of questions, and one of the questions is echoed by both Mark Coleman and Rodney Hald. Did you ever get a chance to meet Eleanor Roosevelt during her visits to Tuskegee, Alabama, or after? Colonel Brown, did you get a chance to meet?
No, as a matter of fact, she visited Tuskegee. That was back in early 19. It was either late 40 or very early 1941. Eleanor was on the Rosenwall Foundation, which was a very large philanthropic organization, which took on a lot of costs and things. And she was visiting. They were having one of their annual meetings down at Tuskegee Institute at the time, and she had attended it. And while she was there, she went over and she met Chief Alfred Anderson. We call him Chief. He was the head instructor down there. As a matter of fact, Alfred Anderson was just one of 6 commercially rated pilots back in 1932. So he was selected to run the civilian pilot training program that was going on not at Moulton Field at the time, but at another field down in Tuskegee. If you've never heard of the civilian pilot training program, this started up in 1939. There were some far-thinking Congress people who said it wasn't a matter of if we were going to war, it was more a matter of when we were going to war. So they thought it would be a great idea if they started a civilian pilot training program. They authorized it at a number of white colleges around the country. And then a gentleman from Montana amended that law to provide funding for 6 black colleges in the South to participate in that program. Well, that program started up, and the idea was this. We would have a pool of pilots. And with a pool of pilots, the normal training program had 4 phases, 10 weeks each, and ran for 40 weeks. Well, if we had a pool of pilots, we could eliminate pre-flight and primary, bring them right into basic and advanced, and we could get pilots trained in 1/2 the period of time. So that was the reason for starting the civilian pilot training program. Chief Anderson was over that program down at Tuskegee, and there is where Eleanor met Chief Anderson, and you know the rest of the story. She asked Chief Anderson to give her a ride in the airplane and so forth. And what you may not know is that Eleanor was pretty much the conscience of the President of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I don't know to what extent he listened or paid attention to her, but at least she was his conscience. And I'm certain all you old married folks know that when the wife talks, the husband kind of listens to that thing. And Eleanor was a very, very bright woman. So I imagine there was a lot of discussion. So they went up, they flew, they came back, and Chief was saying, well, yeah, we are participating in the civilian pilot training program, but they still will not select black pilots from those pool of trainees and bring them in for military training. So that was the big discussion. And it was several months after that that the Franklin Roosevelt issued the order and said, you will start accepting them.
Very, very interesting. And as you know, from those days till today, there's been a tremendous amount of progress made in integrating both military and society. And the battle continues. We still see evidence of some unbelievable treatment in the negative. And our mission in the Red Tail Squadron is to help promote and present the living history so that we can all join in the fight to help bring real equality and opportunity to everyone. What's interesting about these programs is on several occasions we've had the opportunity to learn how some of the comments and the statements that we've heard through the air shows around the country may not always be accurate. And it's interesting that Mr. Bill Zook from Winnipeg has concurred with your assessment that the first ME-262 was in fact not shot down by the Tuskegee Airmen. He indicates here that the Spitfire pilots of the 401st RCAF Squadron are credited with the first victory over an ME-262 and took the victory while they were in a landing configuration. So,
well, that is a new story for me too, because I have never heard that.
Fantastic.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is amazing, and we hear a lot of stories as we go to these air shows. Some of them are based in fact, and some of them are embellished or not quite as accurate as we would wish. But our effort is to help bring the truth to light as often as we can. And in that vein, I have a question here from David Waple. Colonel Brown, what is the most important lesson that you think we should all take from the Tuskegee experience?
Well, I guess I would say, you know, don't make judgments on a man by the color of his skin. As we demonstrated, we had skills very, very similar to other races, other people, and that given that opportunity to cultivate those skills and whatnot, will perform as well as anyone will perform. But I would say don't make the judgment based on that alone. You know, base whatever judgment you are going to make about that man on the way he does perform and what he actually does. And that I would say is perhaps the more important thing. And it is something that is, you know, very, very, you know, true today. I'm certain that there are many jobs that perhaps it isn't as prevalent as back then. As a matter of fact, I know that it is not. But I imagine there's a lot of people of color who have been turned down for jobs and whatnot strictly because of their color and not have been given opportunities. But I just say just don't make judgment on the color of a man's skin.
Wise words indeed, and echoed in the efforts of the Red Tail Squadron through our Rise Above traveling exhibit. This exhibit is sponsored through the generous contributions of the Texas Flying Legends Museum, and we are incredibly grateful for their contributions to help us bring this story to light. The Rise Above educational effort consists of 6 core beliefs that we present to school groups around the nation. Those beliefs are these simple statements. Number 1, aim high. Number 2, believe in yourself. Number 3, use your brain. Number 4, never quit. Number 5, be ready to go. And most important, to have the confidence and expect to win. And the Tuskegee Airmen certainly exemplify all of these principles. And we are very grateful for their participation from the beginnings of the Red Tail Project through our maturity into the Red Tail Squadron, having restored our P-51C not once but twice, the first time in the early 90s, and once again beginning in 2004 after the crash of the red-tailed Mustang took the life of our original squadron leader, Don Hines. And as Colonel Brown will testify, all of us took that tragedy to heart and and frankly used the lessons of the Tuskegee Airmen to continue this challenge. And Colonel Brown, we're very grateful for your continued participation in this effort, and look forward to many, many more opportunities to share the enlightenment of a whole new group of eager and interested students, and to use your history to inspire them to overcome the obstacles that they face. So we'd like to invite everybody to join us at redtail.org to learn more about the traveling exhibit and learn more about the history of the Tuskegee Airmen. These webinars have been focused on the accuracy of the George Lucas film, Red Tail. And I wonder if you could visit a little bit about that. There were a couple of questions online. I don't know if you can see those, Colonel Brown, but let me scroll back up through the menu of questions and see if I can get to them as you take a few minutes and tell us what your thoughts are on the accuracy of the Lucasfilm Red Tail.
Well, overall, the movie it's entertainment, and it is what it is. It is an action-packed movie. Some of the individual performances are okay, but they didn't go that much in depth, and they weren't really developed. Most of the emphasis was on what was taking place in the air. A number of the fights and whatnot come out of factual statements. I mean factual air battles. For example, the destroyer that the two of them hit and blew out of the water takes place on two of our pilots, Captain Pruitt and his wingman was coming back, and they saw that that destroyer in the water. And I don't think it was an actual destroyer from what Colonel McGee said the other day, but nevertheless the ship was in the water, and they strafed it, and just by pure unadulterated luck, they hit the big magazine and room, and there's where they keep all the gunpowder and everything, and it just blew the ship right out of the water. Now, in all honesty, you could probably send up 100 pairs of aircraft and try to duplicate that, and none of them would probably ever duplicate it. But that took not only skill, but that took an awful lot of luck. But it happened, and we were given credit for destroying it, even though it was something that we would not have expected to have ever happened. And they use that factual story, and they portray that. Of course, they did it in a much more grandiose fashion than the way it actually happened. The raid on Berlin was a true mission. We went to Berlin in 1924. We sent the 5th Bomb Wing, which was the B-7, the only bomber that had the range that could do it. The B-24s did not have the range, and that was based upon a true story. It was a 1,600-mile round trip, 800 up, 800 back. We had to use oversized tip tanks, 110-gallon tanks, to do that mission. And then it so happened that the Yellowtails, which was to have relieved us, for some reason or other, did not get off the ground. So we had to stay with the bombers, not only in penetration over target and then withdrawal, but we had to do it because we didn't get relief from the 52nd, the Yellowtail pilots. I don't know, at one time I had heard what the story was. I don't know if it was bad weather or what, but nevertheless, the 52nd didn't get off the ground to relieve us. So that was based upon a factual story. Of course, you look at it the way Mr. Lucas presented it. It was kind of wild and woolly, and it was very, very. I'm certain the guys on the mission would say, yeah, it was exciting, but not quite that exciting. So there are some liberties, and of course, you have to take those liberties because that's what people come to movies to see, and so they do. They take some liberties, even though the incident is based upon facts. They then embellish what they present in the movie as they portray those facts.
We've got several questions here about where the Red Tail Squadron will be displaying our aircraft and the traveling Rise Above exhibit, as well as where are there exhibits and displays in museums that tell the Tuskegee Airmen story? And to be honest, there are many around the country that are joining in this effort now, and we're grateful to have inspired some and participated with many others. As you know, from coast to coast in the United States, there are many exhibits and displays from Kermit Week's incredible effort at his Fantasy of Flight exhibit in Florida to several around the country, including, and the most important, I believe, is the absolute pinnacle of all of them, the original air base at Moton Field in Tuskegee, Alabama. Not to be forgotten, of course, is the Chanute Army Air Base. Several throughout the country, including many put together by the Commemorative Air Force, and literally from coast to coast. But we've got a growing schedule of exhibits and appearances that the Red Tail Squadron will be putting together, and we invite you to consider putting together a sponsorship team to bring us to your hometown. We would love to come and join you, and it really doesn't matter where. We're willing to make the effort to tell this story live and in person with the aircraft, and if the aircraft can't get there, we will do everything we can to get our road crew engaged to bring this exhibit that the Texas Flying Legends Museum has put together, helped us put together. This is a 53-foot tractor trailer that has an expanded wraparound similar to an IMAX theater. It is a surround screen and a surround sound experience that is quite impressive, and we debuted that at the Air Venture in Oshkosh last year to great fanfare, and in fact, George Lucas and his production team got to see the exhibit there, and that struck up a great opportunity for us to work with Mr. Lucas and assisting him in promoting this remarkable film. And prior to that, we had worked with his producers, Mr. McCallum and Mr. Knoll, in talking about how to accurately execute the flying scenes and some of the remarkable scenes that you can see in the Red Tails film. I'm personally very enthusiastic about the film. There have been some great comments about it as to its accuracy, and we're very enthused about how it at least begins to open people's eyes and inspire them to learn more about this remarkable story. And our story, our effort goes, as I said, from coast to coast and beyond. In fact, one of the new pilots who we hope to soon see behind the controls of our Red Tail Mustang is Captain Bill Shepard from Canada, and we encourage him at every step of the way, and very much look forward to seeing him join the flight team. And
that's great. When is he joining?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to leave that up to our squadron leader, Brad Lang, and the rest of the flight review crew. We know that Mr. Shepard is certainly capable. He has many hours in the T6 squadron flying for that Canadian exhibition group, and I've had the privilege of meeting him in New York, in upstate New York, at the Geneseo Air Show. That is another place that people in the eastern part of the country can get a look at the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. And frankly, in the middle of July, I would encourage everybody to make their way to the Historic Aircraft Group at Geneseo, New York, to see one of the best air shows in the world.
Let me ask a question. How many pilots, how many P5, P-51 pilots will you now have flying the 51 after he joins it?
Well, I believe we've got about a half a dozen checked out in the aircraft right now. Doug Rosendahl, of course, led the charge and was followed by Brad Lang and Alan Miller, Paul Stoika from the southern part of the USA, and Tim Jackson. And I'm more interested in getting our Backseaters Club logged in. We've had quite a historic collection of people who've had the privilege of riding in the back seat of our Red Tail Mustang, and invite everybody in this audience today to explore that opportunity at redtail.org. You can ride in the P-51C Mustang. And
I can attest to the fact it is a real fun ride.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, I flew it in the back of it in July of 2001 when I was up there before what Edina.
Well, I'm told there is one chair better than the back seat of the P-51C Mustang. That happens to be the one just ahead of you in that airplane.
Yeah, I agree.
So the upshot of that is if anybody would like to find out what it would be like, you don't have to watch a movie. You don't have to wait for somebody to retell the story. You can experience it yourself. And the Red Tail Squadron is here to help present that experience for fans and historians around the country and around the North American continent. So by all means, take a look at redtail.org and learn more about that opportunity and others in joining as a volunteer in the Commemorative Air Force effort to tell this story and many, many other unheralded stories about the people who, I believe, saved the world in World War II. Colonel Brown, can you stay with us for a few more minutes? And
a few more minutes. Then I got a nice 3-hour drive, look at me in the face, from Catawba back down to Columbus, Ohio.
How about that? Well, we appreciate that, and by all means, more questions in for Colonel Brown. We'd appreciate that. And another question here asking if you have had the chance to see the George Lucas documentary Double Victory that was recently broadcast, and if you have any comments about that.
No, I haven't seen that. I haven't. I want to, but I just haven't seen that yet.
Well, I would encourage viewers, including the questioner here, to take a look at the documentary that our associate Adam White produced called Red Tail Reborn. That's recently been airing on public television channels in the Ohio area, and I've seen the film. It is a wonderful a replay. Actually, it's an enhanced version, an extended version of his original film, a documentary that aired on over 300 public television stations across the country about the Red Tail Project, efforts to restore the aircraft, and continue on our challenging journey to tell this remarkable story. So we'll look forward to seeing that at the earliest opportunity, and we'll get your comments and other Tuskegee Airmen's comments on future episodes of this effort here. So thank you for that. Mary Jo Tenuto wants to know, what did you do after you left the military?
Well, that's interesting. I retired in 1965, and while in the military, I had been in the training command, and I taught in the Navigator Flying School. I had a section of electronic instructors that ran a 4 months, 5 months program for all new navigators. These navigators were primarily, after graduation at that time, were being assigned to SAC to fly in the B-47. And they decided early on that to get that big 6-engine pogo stick into the air, and then after you're up an hour, to have a tube or something go out, and he loses his whole radar system, the nav does, then you wind up pretty much aborting the mission, because that was an integral piece of equipment to fly in that training mission. So someone said, well, geez, why don't we give these guys about a 5-6 month course in electronics, and maybe they can do some very simple in-flight maintenance on that radar system that would probably save the training mission. And that's what they did. And I was down in Arlington Air Force Base, and I did that for approximately 4 years. So I got a touch of teaching while I was in the military. Well, when I got out of the military, I was 40 at the time, and in Columbus, I thought, boy, I would love to teach, but not at the high school level. I would prefer to go at the post-secondary level and teach in the 2-year level, which normally offers associate degrees. So there were very few of them in Ohio, which kind of surprised me, because I thought this industrialized state would have them all over the place, but they didn't. But they were starting one down in Columbus, and they called it grade 13, 14. And I joined them. And long story short, I started in as I had my bachelor's degree in mathematics and physics. So they were looking for someone just like that. And I interviewed with him in January of 1965. He hired me on the spot. I retired in May and went with him that summer. And from that point, I rose through the ranks from instructor to department chairperson of the electronic engineering technology up into dean of the engineering division, and from there over to the vice president for academic affairs. So I stayed with the school up until 1986, and during that period we went from 67 students with 3 programs up to, at that time we had 13,000 students when I retired. Today that school has continued to grow, and we now have approximately 30,000 students at Columbus State Community College, which is one of the largest community colleges within the state of Ohio. But there's where I spent 20-some-odd years with Columbus State when it was nothing but just getting started with 67 students and 3 programs. So that's what I did immediately. Then after retiring from there, I went into the consultant business, and I still have a small business going on, and I'm consulting now with the state of Ohio with the Board of Career Colleges and Schools. We regulate all of the profit-making private schools, about 280 of them here in the state of Ohio, and I'm the so-called curriculum specialist for.
How about that? Continuing to inspire as long as you possibly can, and I take that very, very much to heart, and reflect and actually echo the comments from the Tenuto family, who wants to let you know that they are fellow community college professors and consider you a hero as a teacher and as a veteran of the military service. And they, as many others, are here expressing their gratitude for your service. I have a comment from Bill Lyon from Northfield, Vermont. The hometown of Robert Cole, a Tuskegee Airman, the only Tuskegee Airman from Vermont, it says here. And he's got an interesting question. Can you explain the difference from the difference between flight officer, second lieutenant, the different rankings in the flight program?
Well, starting with a second lieutenant, that was a commission. Second lieutenant on up. Then someone decided that why don't we use a non-commissioned grade for pilots? Now the military, Army already had a non-commissioned grade. They were called warrant officers, and you may have heard that terminology, a warrant officer. Well, he was a non-commissioned. So they introduced a similar rank for the Army Air Force, and only they called him a flight officer, but it was a non-commissioned rank. Matter of fact, in my class, I think we had, out of the class of 31, I think we had something like 8, 9, 10 flight officers. But those that went overseas, rose right up through the ranks and went from flight officer to second lieutenant and first lieutenant and so forth. But that was the difference. Second lieutenant was a commission, and the other was a non-commissioned rank.
Very, very interesting. This has been a fascinating glimpse into the real history from the real people who created, who lived it, and who continue to live and espouse the ideals of persistence and excellence. The Tuskegee Airmen, Colonel Brown, we thank you for your participation today and in the previous efforts to help tell your story and the rest of the stories from the rest of your teammates. And we want to thank all of our viewers for joining us. And actually, we look forward to developing future programs and putting those into the hands, into the ears, and into the schools and classrooms all around the world. We're very excited about the response we've had to this program, and again want to ask people to take a look at our website at redtail.org for more information on how you can support this very worthwhile effort. And as we wrap up this initial series, again, our thanks to Colonel Harold Brown, and we regret that we haven't been able to get to some of the questions, and as you've no doubt guessed by now, if you weren't involved early in the program, Colonel Charles McGee was unable to join us today. We hope that is nothing serious and simply a scheduling conflict. We wish all of our Tuskegee Airmen and the veterans and their families the very best. Greetings and best wishes as well to your brother, Harold, to Bubba, and his
thank you.
challenges, and we look forward to seeing him up and about again very, very soon. So, any final comments?
Thank you, Stan, and I think you did an excellent job moderating these 4 events.
Well, it's been a little bit of a challenge with some of the technical issues as we are learning our way technology, and we're grateful for your participation and your continued patience with us. I'd like to thank our special guests, Colonel Charles McGee and Colonel Harold Brown from the Tuskegee Airmen. Special thanks needs to go out to our producer and technical director Elena Wells from the Eberly Group. Production assistance by Lori Gordon. Technical advisors Doug Rosendahl and John Bile. Our project leader at the Red Tail Squadron, Brad Lang. Graphics, photography, and website support by Max Haynes. And especially to our sponsors, the Commemorative Air Force, under the able leadership of Steve Brown. Invite all of you to explore getting involved with Commemorative Air Force. This organization operates as a nonprofit volunteer organization throughout the continent and around the world, restoring the aircraft and preserving the history of these World War II legends. A special thanks to the Texas Flying Legends Museum for their very generous support and continued sponsorship of the Red Tail Rise Above traveling exhibit. If you'd like to have this exhibit, the aircraft and or the Rise Above exhibit trailer at your town, in your schools, we invite you to take a look at redtail.org. Again, thank you for your participation. We really, really appreciate it and look forward to future programs. On behalf of the Commemorative Air Force, I'm Stan Ross.